Jumièges Abbey, winter 1450. Behind a locked oak door, something is rotting, and everyone in the corridor can smell it. This is not a battlefield, not a plague pit. This is the private chamber of Agnès Sorel, the King of France's most powerful mistress. Men who survived sieges now cover their faces. Incense burns non-stop, but it can't hide the sweet, sick odour of tissue breaking down while the body is still alive. In the 15th century, a smell like this wasn't just illness. It was guilt made physical. History called her the Fair Agnès. But what happens when beauty, the only protection an uncrowned woman has, starts to decay? Because once the smell begins, love stops, protection ends, and the court starts asking a different question. Is she sick, or being erased? 6 centuries later, her bones would tell a story the king's scribes tried to bury. Before we rewind, tell us where you're watching from, because this case survived 600 years of silence to reach you, and someone in that palace wanted her death to look like nature. In the court of Charles VII, Agnès Sorel held power without a title. She was not crowned. She was not protected by law. Her authority existed only as long as her body remained desirable, untouched, and, above all, pure in appearance. In 15th century France, beauty was not vanity. It was armour. Lose it, and you lost your right to exist. As the first official royal mistress, Agnès occupied a position that had no precedent and no safety net. Court etiquette treated her body as political property. Her skin, her scent, her fertility, each was silently audited. A woman without a crown who appeared unclean was assumed to be morally compromised, physically dangerous, and therefore disposable. This was not superstition. It was protocol. And she had enemies who understood this rule perfectly. The most dangerous was the Dauphin, future Louis I. To him, Agnès was not a woman, but a cognitive infection. Chroniclers record his hostility not as jealousy, but as disgust. He believed she had softened the king's judgment, rerouted patronage, and contaminated the line of succession. To the Dauphin, removing Agnès was not cruelty, it was sanitation. Then comes the timeline fracture. Agnès survives childbirth. On paper, she should recover. Instead, witnesses begin to note something wrong. Not dramatic pain, not screams, something subtler, a persistent weakness, a pallor that makeup can no longer fully disguise. And then, according to several accounts, a leakage. Fluids that should not be there, odours that could not be explained by fatigue alone. This is where the investigation begins. Postpartum complications were common, but silence around them was enforced. A woman was expected to return to court fully intact, as if birth left no residue. When Agnès does not, the court does not ask what happened, it asks what she has become. In a system where purity is currency, unexplained bodily failure reads as moral debt. Some later rumours suggest poison, others imply divine punishment. But the records show something colder, a court already prepared to abandon her the moment her beauty faltered. The Dauphin does not need proof. He needs decay to become visible, and it is already starting to surface, slowly, quietly, inside a body that has just brought life into the world and is now beginning to lose its own. Early 1450. The childbirth is over, but the recovery never arrives. What begins as fatigue, documented as pallor, faintness, and a reluctance to eat, quickly reveals itself as something systemic. This is not the tiredness of a new mother. It is the first stage of dissolution, a body failing to reassemble itself after being opened. Agnès responds the only way a woman in her position can, by performing health. Court records and later inventories note her reliance on cosmetics common to the elite. Lead-based whites, vinegar washes, scented powders. Venetian cerise smooths the surface while poisoning it. The grey undertone beneath her skin is concealed with brightness. The ritual is not vanity, it is triage, If she looks well, she remains protected. If she looks ill, she is finished. But the body betrays her in ways paint cannot seal. The first scandal is not pain. It smells. Servants begin to note it in coded language, air turned, sickness lingering. Incense is burned more frequently. Windows are opened in winter. In the 1400s, odour was not a symptom, it was a verdict. A foul smell suggests corruption, putrefaction, and a failure of internal order. To medieval medicine, stench means rot. To medieval morality, rot means sin. And sin spreads faster than disease. Whispers move through corridors before physicians move toward the bed. A woman who smells wrong is assumed to be wrong. Her illness is no longer private, it becomes interpretive. Was the birth improper? Was the body overused? Has the desire finally exacted its price? The language hardens. What cannot be named medically is translated morally. Agnes keeps appearing in public. She sits upright. She smiles. She wears brighter gowns to distract from the narrowing of her frame. This is not denial. It is containment. Each appearance buys time. Each day without collapse delays the court's permission to discard her. But the odour returns, stronger, sweet sick, unmistakable. By now, the court does not ask whether she's ill, it asks why. And in a culture that confuses pathology with punishment, the question answers itself. The rumours take a familiar shape, one that absolves everyone else of responsibility. If the fair Agnes is beginning to rot, then perhaps, some whisper, her soul was already forfeit. The collapse accelerates quickly. What had been fatigue became violent dysentery, sudden, uncontrollable and relentless. Contemporary notes describe fluxes that leave the body emptied and shaking. The abdominal pain is no longer a dull ache. It arrives in waves, sharp and gnawing, bending her spine inward as if the organs themselves are trying to flee. Fever follows, high, sustained, the kind that loosens time and unmoors the mind. This is the moment when illness stops being private. Physicians are summoned in rotation. They do not agree on the cause, but they agree on the method. In the medical logic of the 15th century, sickness is excess. The body is out of balance. Something must be removed. And so they begin the purge. Bloodletting first. Bowls are filled, measured, replaced. Then cupping. Heated glass pulled from the skin with a wet sucking sound, raising bruised domes meant to draw out corruption. Each intervention is recorded as action, proof of loyalty, proof of competence. None of it treats infection. All of it accelerates dehydration. The room changes character. Curtains are drawn to block drafts. Fires are stoked to keep the fever from turning inward. Windows are sealed. The air thickens. Sweat, incense, waste and iron mix into a single suffocating atmosphere. This is no longer a sick room. It is a closed system. Heat feeds bacteria. Stillness feeds fear. Agnes drifts in and out of delirium. Witnesses later recall moments of lucidity, brief, sharp returns, followed by hours of rambling speech, half-formed prayers, fragments of court gossip spoken to no one. Fever erases the boundary between thought and sensation. Pain becomes total. Sleep becomes impossible. The physicians escalate. More purging. Herbal infusions meant to cool the blood. Poultices pressed against the abdomen to calm the cramps. Each treatment removes more fluid, more strength. The logic is circular and fatal. The worse she looks, the more aggressively they cleanse. The more they cleanse, the faster the body collapses. This is not ignorance alone. It is pressure. Agnes is the king's favourite. That status protects everyone in the room. Physicians, attendants, clerks. Each one's proximity to power depends on her continued existence. If she improves, they are rewarded. If she stabilizes, they remain indispensable. If she dies, protection evaporates instantly. So the treatments continue. Records grow fragmented here, entries shortened, language becomes evasive, symptoms are described without timelines, failures are attributed to the malignancy of the humours or the will of God. No one writes, "We're making her worse." No one records the obvious. A fevered postpartum body is being bled dry. By now the smell is returned with force, sharper, more unmistakable. Clothes are pressed to their mouths. Servants rotate more frequently. The door remains closed. Inside, Agnes is being dismantled in the name of cure. Outside, the court waits. Because once the purges stop working, there will be only one question left, and no one in that room can afford to be standing too close when it's asked. The story changes tone here, not because her condition improves, but because language fails. In the surviving accounts, a new word appears: worms. Chroniclers do not describe organs, they do not describe infection, they describe consumption. They write that Agnes was being eaten from within, that something alive was moving where life should not be. To a modern reader, the phrase sounds grotesque. To a 15th century court, it was diagnostic. This was the only vocabulary available. Without microscopes, without germ theory, a body that was wasted rapidly, skin thinning, belly distending, breath turning foul, could only be understood as infestation. If flesh appeared to vanish while the person still breathed, then something must be feeding. Worms were not metaphor, they were medical logic. The investigative record shows how quickly this explanation spreads. A single phrase in a household report becomes a rumour. The rumour becomes a certainty. Servants stop describing symptoms and begin describing entities. Not fever, movement, not pain, gnawing, not infection, consumption. Fear rewrites observation, and fear is contagious. Agnes hears it before anyone dares say it to her face, whispers behind curtains, voices lowering when she stirs, the sudden reluctance to touch linens, to change bandages, to meet her eyes. According to later testimony, some attendants refused to eat in the room, convinced the air itself was contaminated by whatever was working inside her. This is where the horror turns inward. Imagine being weak, delirious, half-conscious, and realizing the people around you believe you're being eaten alive by something sent from hell. Imagine hearing your own name paired with words like corruption, unclean, damned. In a religious court, infestation is not neutral. It is judgment. The physicians do nothing to stop this narrative. In fact, some enable it. If worms are the cause, then purging makes sense. If worms are the enemy, then mercury, herbs, and violent cleanses are justified. The myth does not replace medicine. It weaponizes it. Incense thickens in the chamber. Not the light scent used for prayer, but heavy, resinous smoke that clings to fabric and skin. Officially, it is meant to purify the air. Unofficially, it serves another function: concealment. Because beneath the perfume is a smell no ritual can explain away, the unmistakable odour of internal decay. By now, her gut has effectively stopped functioning. The body is no longer processing, it is fermenting. Gas distends the abdomen, waste backs up. The breath turns metallic and sour. This is not possession, it is organ failure. But no one in the room has words for that, so they choose demons. The worms story offers comfort. If the cause is supernatural, no one is responsible. Not the doctors, not the treatments, not the court that sealed the room and bled her dry. A monster inside her body is easier to face than the idea that they are watching a preventable death. And as the smoke grows thicker, one truth becomes unavoidable, even if no one dares to say it out loud. The incense isn't rising to God anymore. It's sinking, heavy and desperate, trying to cover the smell of a body that has already begun to die from the inside out. This is where folklore collapses under pressure. Strip away the language of demons and worms, and what remains is a medical file. Fragmented, biased, but brutally consistent. Agnès Sorel did not rot because she was cursed. She rotted because her body entered a state that 15th century medicine had no capacity to stop: systemic sepsis, most likely triggered by puerperal fever. Childbirth in 1450 was not a recovery. It was a wound left open. Puerperal fever begins quietly. Bacteria introduced during or after delivery enter the bloodstream. There are no antibiotics, no sterilized hands, no concept of containment. Once the infection escapes the uterus, it spreads unchecked, turning the blood itself into a delivery system for toxins. This is slow violence. The mechanics are relentless. Fever spikes push the brain into delirium. Dehydration thickens the blood, reducing circulation to vital organs. The kidneys begin to fail. The liver lags. Waste products accumulate faster than the body can clear them. Breath takes on a sharp, metallic edge. Not symbolic, but chemical. It's the smell of metabolic collapse. Witnesses describe her drifting in and out of awareness, unable to track time, reacting to voices that may or may not be present. This isn't possession. It's encephalopathy, brain dysfunction caused by circulating toxins. The mind is drowning in its own bloodstream, and the environment finishes the job. Castles were magnificent to look at, lethal to inhabit. Food was stored near waste. Water sources ran through animal yards. Bedding was reused. Hands moved from chamber pot to patient without washing. Every intervention carried contamination deeper into the body. Every attempt to help increase the bacterial load. The physicians respond with urgency, but not precision. They bleed her to release heat. They restrict fluids to control diarrhea. They purge an already dehydrated body. Each decision makes sense within humoral theory. Each one accelerates organ failure. This is not incompetence. It is doctrine. By now, the infection is no longer local. It is systemic. Blood pressure drops. Capillaries leak. Tissues starve. The body begins to cannibalize itself to maintain core function. Skin pales, then greys. Extremes are cool. The sweet sick stench intensifies, not from the room, but from her breath. And buried in the margins of a physician's ledger, almost as an afterthought, is a detail that reframes everything. A substance administered daily, meant to drive out corruption, meant to cleanse what could not be seen. Mercury. At the time, it was a standard treatment for parasitic illness. Today, we know it as a systemic poison, a nephrotoxin, a compound that damages kidneys already struggling to filter infected blood, a substance that worsens neurological confusion, gastrointestinal breakdown, and immune collapse. The cure wasn't neutral, it was complicated. By the time the doctors realize she isn't improving, it's too late to stop. To withdraw treatment now would be an admission, not just of failure, but of responsibility. So the protocol continues, dose after dose, cleanse after cleanse, and somewhere between infection and intervention, the line disappears. What is killing her is no longer just the disease, but the system responding to it. The body waited 6 centuries to answer back. In 2004, forensic scientists reopened the case that medieval France never truly investigated. Agnès Sorel's remains were exhumed with modern instruments, modern chemistry, and none of the court's fear. What they found wasn't subtle. Her bones contained mercury levels nearly 10,000 times higher than normal, a concentration so extreme it could not be explained by environment, burial conditions, or contamination after death. This wasn't background noise, it was exposure. Immediately the debate fractures into 2 camps. One whispers assassination, the other insists on treatment, and the evidence refuses to choose a side cleanly. In the 15th century, mercury was medicine. It was prescribed for parasitic infestations, the so-called worms. It was believed to purge corruption from the blood, to force illness out through sweat, saliva, and waste. Physicians applied it orally, topically, sometimes repeatedly, especially when symptoms worsened instead of improved, which is exactly when Agnès received more. But mercury is also a lethal nephrotoxin. It attacks the kidneys first, shutting down filtration in a body already drowning in infection. It erodes the gastrointestinal tract. It destabilizes the nervous system. In high doses, it does not cure disease, it accelerates collapse. The clinical symptoms match the accounts with disturbing precision. Bleeding gums, teeth loosening in the jaw. Excessive salivation is mistaken for expelling evil. Tremors in the hands, episodes of confusion, paranoia, and hallucination. The mind splinters under chemical assault layered on top of sepsis and dehydration. This is where the horror sharpens. Because mercury poisoning doesn't look like poison. It looks like it is deteriorating. It looks like the illness is getting worse. And in that misinterpretation, the protocol becomes a trap. Worsening symptoms justify increased dosing. The more she fails, the more aggressively she's treated. A closed loop, a chemical echo chamber. Was this planned negligence? Possibly. Removing the king's mistress solved several political problems at once. Or was it medicinal murder without intent? Doctrine followed to its lethal conclusion. The bones don't answer the motive. They only confirm exposure. And then there's the detail the court never wrote down. Mercury was also used cosmetically. In small amounts, it lightened skin, smoothed texture, preserved the illusion of beauty just a little longer. In a court where Agnès's value was inseparable from her appearance, the pressure to maintain that illusion never stopped, even as her organs failed. To save her beauty, they may have poisoned her blood, not with a blade, not with a plot whispered in corridors, but with routine, with trust in procedure, with a belief system that could not imagine stopping. The final cruelty is this: whether mercury was administered as medicine, cosmetic, or both, it worked exactly as intended. It erased the symptoms by erasing the patient. By the final weeks, Agnès Sorel is no longer dying loudly. The violence has retreated inward. She cannot swallow solid food. Even water comes back up, tinged with bile. Her skin, once described by poets as luminous, has thinned to something almost translucent, stretched tight over a body swollen with retained fluid. Veins map her arms and neck like ink under parchment. To the physicians, this is weakness. To anyone standing close, it looks like a body that has lost the ability to keep itself sealed. The chamber at Jumièges grows unnaturally quiet, not peaceful, managed. Servants move softly, instructed not to linger. Linen is changed quickly and burned discreetly. Heavy clothes are pressed to mouths before anyone crosses the threshold. Wax is applied to door seams, not for warmth, but to trap the smell inside. The court does not say the word plague, but it behaves exactly as if one has already been named. Charles VII still comes, but distance defines every visit. He does not sit beside the bed. He stands. His words are formal, stripped of intimacy, delivered like lines rehearsed for witnesses. The king has learned where love ends and liability begins. His presence is brief, his exits immediate. Power cannot afford prolonged exposure. What once made Agnès untouchable, her beauty, has failed, and with it, her protection. Around her, calculation replaces grief. Courtiers speak in low voices about logistics, who will manage access to the king, which alliances will need rebalancing, how quickly the vacuum will fill. No one waits for her death to begin planning the next arrangement. In this room, survival has already moved on. Agnès remains conscious for long stretches, trapped inside a body that no longer obeys her. Fever comes and goes, loosening her sense of time. She hears movement outside the door but rarely sees faces. When she does, they're careful, distant, already looking past her. The horror is not pain alone. It is relevance draining away before the body is fully stopped. In the final days, the silence becomes complete. No prayers spoken aloud, no public vigils, only the faint rustle of fabric, the controlled breathing of those paid to stay, and the knowledge, unspoken but absolute, that she is being managed like a contagion. Agnès Sorel does not die surrounded by devotion. She dies inside a sealed room, treated not as the king's beloved, but as a risk that must be contained until it resolves itself. Agnès Sorel died on February 9th, 1450, without ceremony. There is no final cry, no dramatic seizure. After a month of violent deterioration, the end arrives as a technical failure. Her breathing slows, pauses, resumes incorrectly, then stops altogether. A physician places 2 fingers at her neck, waits longer than necessary, and withdraws his hand. The room exhales. The process is complete. What follows is not grief, but containment. Within hours, the atmosphere around her death changes. The court does not ask what killed her. It asks who will be blamed. Servants are warned against speaking freely. Access to her chamber is restricted. Items are removed, catalogued, or quietly destroyed. The king orders an examination, but the wording of the order is precise and revealing. This is not an inquiry for truth. It is a scan for political exposure. The rumours arrive almost immediately, faster than messengers and official notices. The Dauphin, Louis, the future Louis I, is named in whispers as the poisoner. The accusation fits too neatly to ignore. He despised her influence over his father and referred to her in private correspondence as a corruption of royal judgment. To a court trained in symbolic logic, her rotting body looks like a motive made visible. A diseased corpse becomes a political diagram. The examination produces no clarity. 15th century medicine lacks the vocabulary to name what they are seeing. There is no consensus, no single cause that can be written cleanly into the record. Officially, Agnès Sorel dies of natural causes. Unofficially, she becomes a warning story, a woman who reached too high and paid for it with decay. The case is left open in implication but closed in practice. For centuries, that is where the record stops, until 2004, when modern forensic teams exhume her remains and the narrative fractures. Chemical analysis reveals mercury levels nearly 10,000 times higher than normal background exposure. This is not trace contamination or environmental coincidence, but sustained, repeated dosing over time. The mercury was real, and so was the suffering. Yet the findings do not deliver a murderer. Mercury was medicine in the 15th century. It was prescribed, logged, and administered, according to accepted protocol. The same substance used to save her was fully capable of destroying her kidneys, fracturing her nervous system, and eliminating her ability to survive an already catastrophic infection. Poison and treatment occupy the same line in the ledger. What the modern forensic stamp confirms is not a crime scene with a clear perpetrator, but a system that made her body expendable. Agnès Sorel was never just a patient. She was evidence. Her body was examined, whispered over, politicized, blamed, buried, and then excavated again 600 years later. Not because she was remembered, but because she still had something to prove. Only now does the record close with certainty, not with justice, but with confirmation that her agony was real, and that history, unable to name its killer, chose instead to preserve her suffering as unresolved data. Even in death, she was not allowed to rest. Her body remained an open file long before it was ever permitted to become a memory. In the political ecosystem of 15th century France, beauty was not decoration. It was sovereignty. Agnès Sorel held power not through law, lineage, or title, but through visibility, through the uninterrupted performance of perfection. As long as she remained desirable, she remained protected. The moment her body betrayed that illusion, her political existence collapsed with it. Infection did not merely threaten her life, it revoked her status as a human being worth saving. Once her beauty failed, the court's language shifted. She was no longer spoken of as the king's companion, advisor, or stabilizing force. She had a problem with hygiene, an object of avoidance, a source of risk. In a system where female bodies were understood as vessels to be regulated, bled, purged, and corrected, Her illness was interpreted not as a medical crisis, but as a moral exposure. The infection did not make her weak, it made her illegible. This is where the question hardens. Was Agnès Sorel murdered by a rival who understood exactly how fragile her position was? Or was she consumed by a medical culture that treated the female body as something to be emptied until it behaved? The evidence allows for both readings, and that ambiguity is not a flaw in the record. It is the record. A system that cannot distinguish between treatment and destruction does not need an assassin. It produces its own casualties. In the end, her body did exactly what the court demanded of it. It absorbed the violence quietly. It failed without accusation. It left behind no clear culprit, only residue, chemical, political, and cultural. The mercury in her bones tells us how she died. The silence around her bed tells us why no one stopped it. The final image history preserves is not of Agnès in Jumièges, sweating, delirious, and decaying in a sealed room. It is a portrait. Smooth skin, pale light, perfect symmetry, the fair Agnès, frozen at the precise moment before her body became inconvenient. The painting does its job. It hides the cost. In the halls of power, the only thing more dangerous than being hated is being infectious. If stories like this unsettle you, disturb you, and make you question what history chose to hide, you already know where this is going. Stay close, subscribe, and don't miss what's coming next.